The streets of Chicago had never felt colder. A bitter wind cut through the alleys, carrying the faint smell of smoke and gasoline. Neon signs flickered above empty storefronts, casting jagged shadows on the cracked pavement. Tony had been running for weeks, trying to escape the wrath of a notorious mob boss who had discovered he'd been talking to the FBI. He thought he was careful, blending in, keeping his head down, but tonight, he had nowhere to hide. The corner of State Street in Monroe had become his trap. A black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking his only escape route. From the shadows, men in tailored suits emerged, their faces masked by the dim glow of streetlights. Tony froze. His mind raced, but nothing he'd imagined could prepare him for the moment that followed. Just as the leader of the mob took a step forward, a figure appeared from the opposite end of the street. A young woman, no more than 25, wearing a worn leather jacket and sneakers. She didn't hesitate. She stepped directly between Tony and the mob, arms outstretched as if she could physically hold back a storm. "Stop," she yelled, her voice cutting through the night like a whip. The mob boss stopped, eyes narrowing, surprised by the audacity of this stranger. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice rough like gravel. "Someone who doesn't like bullies," she replied calmly, her gaze steady. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. Tony's jaw dropped. He didn't know her, hadn't spoken a word to her, yet here she was, risking her life to protect him. The wind howled around them, carrying the tension like an electric charge. For a moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of the city, the occasional honk of a taxi, and the mob boss's heavy breathing. "You're insane," one of the mobsters muttered, but even he didn't step forward. The woman took a slow, deliberate step closer, putting herself fully in the path of the men. She wasn't armed, yet she radiated a kind of fearless authority that made the entire group pause. Tony realized that this wasn't just bravery, it was strategy. She was buying time, reading the mob's reactions, and using their own uncertainty against them. "Listen," she said, her voice louder now, commanding attention, "I'm calling the cops. Every word, every move you make is going on video. You hurt him, you go down. I promise you that." She pulled out her phone, already recording, the small light casting a glare on the mob boss's face. The men hesitated. They were trained to intimidate, to control, but something about her presence unsettled them. Even the leader, who had seen countless acts of defiance, felt a flicker of doubt. Tony swallowed hard, heart pounding, watching this stranger defy everything he thought he knew about courage. One wrong move could end everything, but for now, she held the line, standing between him and the storm that had been chasing him. And in that moment, Tony understood something he had never believed before. Courage didn't always come from muscle or guns. Sometimes, it came from a single, determined person willing to stand up when everyone else would run. The mob boss's eyes flicked from the young woman to Tony, disbelief mixing with anger. "You think you can stop us?" he snarled, his voice low but threatening. The air felt electric, every second stretching like an eternity. The mob had cornered countless people before, businessmen, snitches, rivals, and fear usually made them comply. But this woman, she didn't even flinch. Tony's heart raced. He could barely speak. "Who is she?" he whispered, almost to himself. "I'm the one who's about to ruin your night," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. She held up her phone, the screen glowing in the dark, and pressed record. "Everything you do right, now, it's going online and to the cops. One wrong move, and it's all over." The mobsters exchanged nervous glances. The leader, a man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, trying to intimidate her with sheer presence. "Kid, you're gonna regret this," he growled. Instead of backing down, she took a slow step closer, holding her phone steadily. "No," she replied, "you're going to regret hurting him. Because people are watching. I'm watching. And law enforcement is closer than you think." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, from the distance, faint sirens began to wail. The mobsters shifted uneasily. They weren't stupid. They knew the city, and they knew that if anyone could catch them on camera or phone, it could mean jail time. And jail time was worse than anything they had inflicted on others. The leader's hand twitched toward his jacket, probably reaching for a weapon. But before he could act, she calmly raised her free hand and said, "Go ahead, make one move. I dare you. But remember, the cameras, the witnesses, everything, it's all recording." Tony watched, awestruck, as the mob wavered. One by one, they began to step back, eyes darting around nervously. The sound of the approaching police grew louder, echoing off the buildings. "Go," she said softly, nodding toward Tony. "Get out of here." He didn't hesitate. He ran, glancing back only once to see her standing firm, a lone figure against the storm of criminal power. By the time the police rounded the corner, the mob was gone, dispersed into the dark alleys, silent, defeated not by bullets but by courage. The woman finally lowered her phone and let out a long breath, exhaustion and relief washing over her face. Tony approached, still shaking, gratitude flooding his chest. I don't know how to thank you," he said. She shrugged, a small smile breaking through the tension. "You don't need to. Just stay safe." As the police officers questioned Tony and secured the area, the young woman faded into the shadows, almost like a guardian angel who had appeared just in time. That night in Chicago would be remembered, not for the mob's violence, but for the bravery of a stranger who stood her ground when it mattered most. Tony knew one thing for certain. Courage could appear in the most unexpected places, and sometimes, the smallest act of defiance could change everything. The city never really slept, but after that night, the streets felt different to Tony. The neon lights seemed brighter, the hum of traffic sharper, as if the world itself was acknowledging the courage he had witnessed. He walked slowly through the same streets where he had almost met his end, every step weighted with both relief and disbelief. That young woman, his savior, was still fresh in his mind. He wanted to thank her properly, to know who she was, but she had vanished into the shadows, leaving only the memory of her fearless stand. News of the mob confrontation spread quickly. By morning, whispers ran through Chicago's neighborhoods, local bars, and online forums. A woman, unknown, had stopped a dangerous mob from hurting a man. Some said it was luck, others swore it was pure bravery. Tony, however, knew better. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was deliberate, calculated courage, the kind that came from someone who didn't wait for heroes but chose to become one. Tony tried to retrace her steps, hoping to find some clue, some indication of who she was. He visited the corner where it all happened, the asphalt still cold under his shoes, and scanned the area. A few street vendors and late-night workers remembered her, describing a girl in a leather jacket, calm and determined, almost unreal in the way she had confronted the mob. Nobody knew her name. Nobody had seen her again. Meanwhile, the mob wasn't silent. Rumors of the encounter reached their ears, and their anger simmered beneath the surface. They weren't used to being humiliated, especially not by someone so seemingly ordinary. The scarred leader, furious and paranoid, began asking questions, demanding names, and searching the city. But every lead hit a dead end. The woman had planned her intervention carefully. No one knew her identity. She had chosen her moment perfectly, striking where the mob least expected resistance. Tony couldn't shake the feeling that the woman had changed something fundamental in him. He had always lived in fear, of the mob, of consequences, of failure, but her courage forced him to reconsider his own life. He realized he had been passive for too long, letting fear dictate his actions. Now, he felt a spark, a desire to fight back, to stand up, and perhaps even to help others in danger. Weeks passed, and Chicago slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But Tony carried the memory of that night like a talisman, a reminder of what one person could do when they refused to bow to fear. He often returned to the corner where it all happened, imagining her there again, a silent guardian of the streets. And then, one evening, as he walked home, he caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye. Across the street, a figure in a leather jacket paused, watching him with the same calm intensity he remembered. Before he could react, she disappeared into the crowd. Tony smiled to himself, knowing that courage wasn't always visible. Sometimes, it left only a trace, a ripple that changed lives long after the moment had passed. That night, Tony understood the truth. Heroes didn't always wear capes. Sometimes, they walked among ordinary people, stepping forward when no one else dared. And in the city of Chicago, one ordinary person had become extraordinary, proving that bravery could strike anywhere, at any time. Tony couldn't shake the feeling that the mob wouldn't forget that night. Even though the streets seemed calm, every shadow, every distant footstep, made him tense. He knew he had been lucky, saved by a stranger whose bravery had seemed almost unreal. But luck wasn't enough to protect him forever. He had to be careful, and maybe even plan for the future. Days turned into a week, and Tony started noticing small changes. His apartment mailbox contained subtle threats, typed notes with no signature, photographs of him walking to work. The mob wanted to send a message, one that reminded him they were still in control. But he didn't panic. He remembered the young woman's courage, her calm defiance in the face of danger. He drew strength from it, realizing that fear wasn't the only option. He could act. He reached out to the FBI, sharing everything he knew about the mob's recent movements and threats. They were impressed by his intel but more intrigued by his story of the unknown woman who had intervened. "Sounds like someone who's trained, or just fearless," one agent said, raising an eyebrow. Tony nodded, though he didn't know if he would ever see her again. Whoever she was, she had changed the rules of the game, at least for him. Meanwhile, the mob's frustration grew. They had lost face in front of the city, and that night became a story whispered even among their own circles. The scarred leader began obsessing over it, questioning his crew, demanding answers. But Tony had seen only what she wanted him to see, a perfect intervention, leaving no trace of her identity. The mob's pride was bruised, but they had no proof, no leverage, nothing they could use. Tony's own life began to shift in subtle ways. He stopped hiding in the shadows, taking small steps to reclaim control. He returned to work during the day and even started mentoring kids in his neighborhood, teaching them self-respect, awareness, and courage. He realized that the woman had given him more than protection that night. She had shown him what bravery looked like, and he wanted to pass it forward. One evening, walking home, he noticed a figure sitting on a bench at the corner where it had all started. A woman in a leather jacket, face hidden beneath a hood, seemed to be waiting. Tony's heart skipped a beat. He approached cautiously, unsure if this was real or just his mind playing tricks. She looked up briefly, eyes meeting his, and then stood silently. No words, no introductions. Just the same calm, unwavering presence. In that moment, Tony realized that some acts of courage weren't about recognition or thanks. They were about timing, conviction, and the silent understanding that some people were willing to step forward when it mattered most. Before he could speak, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the city night as mysteriously as she had appeared. Tony watched her go, feeling a mixture of awe and gratitude. She had given him more than safety, she had given him perspective. From that day forward, Tony carried that lesson in everything he did. Bravery didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stood firm, silently changing the course of lives. Chicago was quieter than usual that night, the streets slick from a recent rain, reflecting the neon glow of storefronts and streetlights. Tony walked with purpose, a sense of calm settling over him. The chaos of the past weeks, the threats, the mob's shadow, the fear, was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had survived, thanks to the courage of a stranger, and now he understood what it meant to stand firm, even when the odds seemed impossible. He passed the corner where it had all begun, remembering the night a young woman had stepped between him and the mob. Her bravery had been the catalyst for change, not just for him, but for the city in its own small way. The news had covered the story briefly, calling her a guardian angel of the streets, but no one knew her identity. Tony wondered if she ever realized the impact she had made, how her single act of courage had reshaped his life. Meanwhile, the mob was reeling. Word of their public humiliation had spread through the underworld. The scarred leader, desperate to reclaim his reputation, had tried to track Tony down, but the FBI's protection and Tony's newfound awareness kept him safe. His intelligence, combined with the woman's intervention, had left the mob powerless. Their pride shattered, they withdrew from Tony's neighborhood, at least for now, realizing that fear alone was no longer enough to dominate the city streets. Tony had changed too. He no longer hid in the shadows, living in constant anxiety. Instead, He became a subtle force of good in his community, helping young people navigate the streets safely, teaching them vigilance, courage, and the importance of standing up for themselves and others. He spoke often of bravery, not the reckless kind, but the deliberate, thoughtful courage he had witnessed that night. The woman had shown him that heroism didn't need recognition, just conviction. One evening, as he was walking home, he noticed movement in the alley nearby. A figure stepped out of the shadows, familiar yet impossible to forget. The woman in the leather jacket. She didn't speak, didn't introduce herself. She simply gave him a nod, a quiet acknowledgement that their paths had crossed for a reason, and then she turned and melted into the city night, vanishing once again. Tony felt a mix of awe and gratitude. That night, Tony realized the truth he had been avoiding. Life often handed ordinary people extraordinary choices. Courage wasn't always loud or violent. Sometimes, it was standing firm when everyone else flinched, choosing the right moment to act, and risking everything to protect someone else. The mysterious woman had embodied that perfectly. From that day forward, Tony carried her lesson in everything he did. He walked with confidence, acted with purpose, and never underestimated the power of a single, determined individual. And in the city of Chicago, where danger and fear were constants, one person's courage had proven that even the smallest act could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. In the end, Tony understood something essential. Heroes didn't always wear badges or capes. Sometimes, they were strangers in a leather jacket, standing silently between danger and those who couldn't protect themselves. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.